So in our last couple of videos, we were looking at aggregate demand and then short and long run aggregate supply. In this one, we're going to combine them all together. And this is what creates what is known as the aggregate demand aggregate supply model. It's our basic way of looking at our entire macroeconomy. And we use it to analyze different economic fluctuations. So are we in a recession? Are we in an inflationary period? This is how we are going to model it and try to determine what's the best policy to get us out of those situations. Uh, to start out with, the idea of short run macroeconomic equilibrium is about what you'd expect. It's the intersection of aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply. That's it. Same exact idea as your normal supply and demand model. And just like your supply and demand model, your price level can be either above or below your equilibrium. However, it will always correct due to surpluses and shortages within the economy. So there are sort of very short run versions of surpluses and shortages within the economy, but they will always correct. And on the AP test, I've never seen them test that. So we can just sort of assume short run macroeconomic equilibrium is where we're always at. But just in the off chance that we're not, it's the same exact idea. Um, Market forces will force the price up, eliminating the shortage if it's below equilibrium, or market forces will force the price down if we're set above equilibrium. Now, there are different shifts, of course. Now, how does this affect price level and real GDP? Same exact ideas as on your supply and demand model. An increase in aggregate demand will increase price level, increase real GDP. A decrease in aggregate demand will decrease price level, decrease real GDP. The shift of aggregate demand is what is known as a demand shock. And it's just any event that shifts aggregate demand. A positive one shifts it to the right, a negative one shifts it to the left. The short run aggregate supply shifts, once again, same idea as in the supply and demand model. If it shifts left, it's a decrease. That increases equilibrium price level, decreases real GDP. If it's a rightward shift, an increase in short run aggregate supply, it is a decrease in equilibrium price level and an increase in real GDP. These are known as supply shocks. It's any event that shifts your short run aggregate supply curve, and just like in aggregate demand, they can be positive or they can be negative. Positive one increases short run aggregate supply, and negative one decreases it. The decreasing one has a special name for it known as stagflation. Stagflation is the increase in aggregate price level while you have a decrease in real GDP. A lot of times you'll see it referred to as inflation and unemployment are both rising, because that's essentially what you're seeing here. The price level is increasing, that's increasing inflation, and a decrease in real GDP, which we assume a decrease in real GDP is coupled with an increase in the unemployment rate. We will go over stagflation a bit more when we cover the Phillips curve and different theories of economic thought. For now, just know that it's a negative supply shock. Now, when we get to long run macroeconomic equilibrium, it's once again, as you would assume, it's the intersection of all three of your curves. Aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply, and long run aggregate supply are all intersecting in the same place. You could have different gaps. So here we have a negative demand shock causing a decrease in price level and a decrease in real GDP, therefore increasing unemployment. This is known as a recessionary gap, which makes sense if you think about what this means. We have an increase in unemployment and a decrease in aggregate output. That is, by definition, our recession. So our GDP falls below our potential. That's the basic idea of a recession. If we have the long run of that, due to various forces that we will detail later, your long run is your short run aggregate supply will correct. It will shift to the right to get you back to your long run macroeconomic equilibrium level of output. Now, you don't have to know this quite yet, but that is due to falling prices of various commodities and especially labor, decreasing wages, decreasing nominal wages increases your short run aggregate supply curve. That brings us back to your long run level of output. The same would occur if you have a increase in aggregate demand. You have a positive demand shock. And here we have increasing price level and increasing levels of output. We are producing beyond our potential. This is what is known as an inflationary gap. Because of the inflation, you see the price level increasing, therefore the inflationary gap. Now, when this occurs, the way that we correct back to long-run equilibrium is through a short-run aggregate supply shift to the left. And this is due to rising wages and rising commodity prices. So rising nominal wages causes short-run aggregate supply to shift left, and that takes you right back to your long-run level of output. We will go much more in depth in terms of the economic theory behind especially these corrections that take us back to long-run equilibrium. But for now, it's fine just to know that it occurs.